Today we're going to show you how to change the upper rack on your dishwasher, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a number 15 Torx driver. Let me show you how we do it. So we'll start this repair by opening the dishwasher door fully, and we're going to remove any items that may be on that upper rack. Then next we're going to remove the rack stops. This rack stop, we'll need to depress that little tab to release the outside hook. And then just rotate it inward and lift it away. Do the same on the opposite side, and then pull the whole dish rack completely out of the dishwasher. Push the rails back into position, close it up, and then we'll sit the rack on a suitable work surface where we can swap out the row tines and the adjusters. Now our first step will be to remove the upper spray arm. We're going to begin by removing this rear mounting clip that holds the fill tube in place. There are little locking tabs on either side. So beginning on one side, we're just going to push that locking tab in, press down on the mount, push the whole mount towards the center until it comes up and clears it. We'll do the same on the opposite side, and that will release it. Now next we'll do basically the same thing at the center mount. Depress one side in to release it, and push the whole clip over until it pops out through the bottom. Release the locking tab on the opposite side, and then lift the whole assembly away. We'll set that aside. Now next we'll flip it over. We're going to remove the row tines. So simply release the little clips that secure that in place, and rotate them and completely remove them. There'll be 3 for each of those row tines, and then set that aside. Do the same for the opposite side, and just take note of where each of those clips fits on the rack. Just make note of it so that we can put them back in the proper positions, and then set that one aside. Well, next we're going to remove these fold down devices for tall stemware, and you'll note that there are 2 mounting clips on each one. Now the best way to remove those is to pivot the top out and the bottom in. Just use enough force to release those from the wire of the rack, as these pieces tend to get a little brittle with age, so we don't want to use any more force than is necessary. And once we've pivoted those free, you just slide it towards the front and release it. Do the same on the opposite side, and this one will pull it towards the rear to release it. So next we'll remove the stops for the row tines. Again, there is a clip into one of the vertical wires, and then 2 across on the horizontal one. So just pivot it back, and just enough pressure to release those clips, and then set that aside. Repeat for the opposite side. Then next we'll remove the rack adjusters, and for that we'll need a number 15 Torx driver. So we'll begin removing these 2 screws. So just remove these 2 screws and just gently push down on that cover to release that little locking tab, or use your screwdriver to gently tuck it out from behind that wire on the rack. Let it pivot out of position and set it aside. And you can drop the adjuster out of the housing. Now next we want to remove these 2 stops, one on either end of that rack adjuster. And there's a small plastic tab that holds that in position. So we just want to depress that enough to release it. Again, these are plastic parts, and they do become a little brittle with age, so don't apply any more force than is required to release it. And slide that off, and then you can just pivot it and remove it. Do the same on the opposite end. Just Just a little downward pressure on that plastic clip as you depress it. Pivot and remove. Now we can also remove the metal portion of this rack adjuster by depressing these two similar tabs on the top of it. And again, they are quite brittle with age, but it is possible to rotate that whole assembly carefully, and you can pull the whole thing intact out through that opening. In one piece, and then we can just transfer it in that manner to the new rack. We'll just do the same procedure for the opposite side. Remove these two screws, press that little locking tab for the cover, pivot it out, set it aside, lift the lever out of the way, remove the two guide stops on each end. Again, just enough pressure on that tab to release it. Pivot it out, and for the opposite side, the same procedure, just enough pressure on that locking tab to release it, while putting downward pressure on that plastic stop. And again, just pivot that out of the way, and then rotate the whole assembly out through the opening. Now we can discard the old rack. Now before we reinstall the new rack, now to reinstall the adjusters on the new rack, it's a little difficult to put it in as a complete assembly without potentially damaging the vinyl on the rack. So we suggest, while we have them off, that very carefully remove the metal portion from this plastic holder. So you need to just gently depress these tabs just enough to allow that metal to slide past them. And then we can reinstall it on the new rack. So to install the adjuster on the new rack, we're going to locate this gap at the rear of the rack on the upper wire. We'll come in two spaces, and we're going to carefully insert the metal portion of the adjuster. And then we'll take the plastic portion, slide it up from the rear, line that metal up with the slots until it's fully inserted. And then we can position it on the side of the rack. So we'll next take the adjusting lever. I'm going to sit that into the housing. Make sure it sits into both of those hollowed out spots on both sides. And we can pull the assembly up into position so that those two little cutouts sit tightly up against the rack. We'll take the cover, we're going to take that slotted edge of the cover, fit that into the slot on the housing, and then press it into place, and then we can replace the two screws. Now, with those two screws in position, you can just check the operation of that by depressing the little cam button. Next, we'll put those plastic position guides in place. So we'll sit them into the opening, rotate them so that the tabs fit on inside and outside of that vertical wire. Slide it up onto that metal tab on the adjusting bracket until the little locking tab engages. The same for the opposite side. And then repeat for the other adjuster. And again, check the operation of the adjuster. And then install the little guides. Push them through the opening, pivot them around, and then slide them onto that metal tab until that little locking tab engages. And now we're ready to assemble the components on the inside of the rack. Next, we'll install the tine stops. So we'll just locate that right over that vertical wire. Then carefully snap it into position. Do the same for the opposite side. Next, we'll install those supports for the stemware. We'll just slide it in to the edge of the rack. On this one, we'll pull it forward and then pivot it into position. Using enough pressure to snap each of those 4 tabs into place. Do the same on the opposite side. We just slide those into the proper spot, pull them towards the rear of the rack on this one, and then pivot it down to engage the tabs. So with the row tine laying in position, we're going to position that clip so that the saddle portion of it sits over the wire on the row tine. And we're going to rotate it down into position so that the back will clip on the bottom and the opposite side will snap into the wire on the rack. Next, we'll position the one in the center. Again, I'm just going to straddle that row tine and pivot it down into position, making sure that the rear and the top both engage, and again one at the front. Just check the operation of that row tine. Just pull it forward, make sure that it'll lay flat and that it will lock in position. Then do the same for the opposite side. And now we can install the upper wash arm. So we'll flip it upside down, then we'll locate the position to set that center mounting bracket, and just insert one whole side of that completely down into the rack. Then gently pull up on it till the locking tab engages. Make sure that tab is snapped into position. And then we can depress the whole assembly until the other side drops down in, and then pull it up into position. Make sure that the locking tab engages. And we'll go to the rear and do the same thing. We'll rotate that around, set one end into position, snap it up, depress it, push the other one down in, and then pull it up into position. And now we're ready to put the rack back in the dishwasher. We'll open that dishwasher door up again, and we just pull those tracks fully out. And then we'll begin by starting one of the rear wheels into that track, do the opposite side. Make sure we have all 4 wheels properly engaged. Push the rack all the way back. And next we'll install the rack stops. Just hook the bottom in first, and then the top. And then while depressing that tab, we're just going to rotate the whole assembly out over the edge of the rail until it locks in position. Then we just do the same on the opposite side. Hook the bottom in first, then the top, and then rotate it into position, making sure that locking tab engages. Next, push the rack back into position, and our repair is complete.